Ethan gently. Mom might hear, I whispered, my voice trembling like the wind slipping through the wooden door cracks in our seaside house in Port Townsend. My heart pounded as if it might burst out of my chest. My hands gripped the blanket tightly, trying to suppress the trembling that spread through my body. Every small sound in the quiet house, the distant crash of ocean waves, the creak of the wooden floor, made me jump, fearing that this secret would be exposed. I'm Lila Harper, 19 years old, living with my mom, Claire, and my stepdad, Ethan Caldwell, in the small town of Port Townsend, Washington. I once thought I could keep this story buried forever, hidden in the shadows. But it haunts me every day like an unhealed wound. I'm the one to blame, and what I've done didn't just break my mom's heart, it destroyed the family I once cherished. My mom, Claire, is an investigative journalist, always away on work trips, leaving me and Ethan in the cold wooden house. Ethan, 42, is an architect with a fit build and captivating green eyes. He always tried to bond, complimenting the photos I took, inviting me to his studio to look at his blueprints. Lila, you've got real talent, he'd say, his voice warm, but there was something strange in his eyes, deep, not like a stepdad's. I could feel it. My heart beat faster, not from joy but from a wrongness creeping in. I confided in Avery, my best friend at the local coffee shop, but she just laughed, saying I was imagining things. But no, every time Ethan lightly touched my shoulder or looked at me too long when Mom wasn't home, I knew something was off. Under the cold light of the house, I felt a secret growing, like the ocean waves out there, ready to sweep everything away. I was scared, but part of me didn't want to stop. I stepped into Ethan's studio, where the smell of fresh wood and oil paint mingled, creating a space both familiar and foreign. The light from an old desk lamp cast shadows on his architectural drawings, making Ethan's silhouette stand out in the corner. He was hunched over, pencil gliding across paper, sketching the curves of a dream house. Lila, come here, he called, his voice low and inviting, as if I were an essential part of his creative world. I hesitated, my sneakers squeaking softly on the wooden floor, but I moved closer, drawn by the confidence radiating from him. What do you think about the color for this room? Ethan pointed to a drawing, an open space with large windows facing the sea. I leaned in, my shoulder brushing his arm, and a jolt ran down my spine. Maybe blue, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, like the Port Townsend sea at sunset. He smiled, not the polite smile of a stepdad, but a glimmering one, as if I'd touched something deep inside him. You always know how to make things more beautiful, he replied, and I felt my cheeks flush. In the days that followed, Ethan found every way to pull me into his world. He invited me to the studio more often, asking my opinion on projects as if I were a partner, not the 19-year-old girl living in his house. I started looking forward to those moments, when it was just me and him, amid the drawings and dim light. Once, while I was editing a photo on my computer, Ethan stood behind me, his breath lightly brushing my hair. Where'd you take this one? He asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. I pointed to the beach near our house, but my mind wasn't on the answer. His closeness, his body just inches away, made me forget how to breathe normally. That weekend, Ethan invited me to the art festival in Port Townsend. A little break, he said, his eyes lighting up. Mom was in Seattle, busy with an article, so I agreed, thinking the lively atmosphere would ease the strange feeling inside me. Under the twinkling streetlights, we wandered through the stalls, admiring paintings and wooden sculptures. Ethan stopped at a painting of the ocean, waves crashing fiercely. It's like you, he said, his voice soft but loaded with meaning, beautiful but untamable. I laughed, but my heart raced as if he'd touched a secret I wasn't ready to admit. At a corner of the festival, as acoustic music played, Ethan handed me a hot coffee from a stall. His fingers brushed mine as he passed it, and I nearly spilled the drink. Careful, he chuckled, but his eyes didn't leave me, as if searching for something. I turned away, pretending to admire a painting, but my mind was a mess. I knew this feeling was wrong. He was my stepdad, even if not by blood, still family. But every time he was near, part of me wanted to cross that line, to see what waited on the other side. I told Avery the next day at the coffee shop where she worked. Ethan's just trying to be friendly, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Avery raised an eyebrow, setting down a tray of coffee. Lila, be careful. He's paying you unusual attention. I brushed it off, saying she was imagining things, but her words echoed in my head. That night, when Ethan knocked on my door holding a photography book, a wave of heat ran through me. This might help you, he said, handing it over, but his hand lingered on mine longer than necessary. I didn't pull away. The room's light highlighted his strong features, and I realized I was staring too long. The morning after the art festival, I woke to pale sunlight filtering through the curtains, but my heart felt heavy like a stone. The image of Ethan under the streetlights last night, his voice as he spoke about the ocean painting, played on repeat in my mind. "It's like you," he'd said, and I couldn't shake the feeling that those words meant more than a compliment. I stood before the mirror looking at myself trying to find the old Lila, the girl who only cared about photography and dreams, but she seemed swept away in a current I couldn't control. Ethan started appearing in unexpected moments. One afternoon while I was editing photos in my room, he knocked, holding an old camera lens. "This was mine in college," he said, placing it in my hand. His fingers brushed my wrist, soft but enough to make me freeze like a small electric shock. "Try it, Lila. I think you'll make something special." His voice was gentle, but his eyes, deep and sharp, made me feel seen through. I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside was a battle. Part of me wanted to run, part wanted to stay closer to him. In the days that followed, I found myself making excuses to go to Ethan's studio. I told myself it was to learn, to talk about art or architecture, but the truth was different. Once, as he sketched, I stood beside him, pretending to care about the drawing, but really to feel his presence. He looked up, catching my gaze, and for a moment the room seemed to freeze. "You're standing so close, it's hard to focus," he said, half joking, half serious, but his smile didn't hide the tension. I stepped back, heart pounding, but the space between us seemed to shrink, as if an invisible thread was pulling tight. That weekend, Mom came home from her trip, bringing stories about a new article. We ate dinner together, but I couldn't focus. Ethan sat across from me, calmly chatting with Mom, but every time his eyes met mine, a wave of heat spread through me. When Mom asked about the festival, I answered vaguely, afraid my voice would betray me. Ethan, as if reading my mind, chimed in, "Lila liked the ocean painting. She's got great taste." Mom smiled, unsuspecting, but I felt like I was standing on a cliff's edge. I ran to Avery's coffee shop the next day, needing a place to breathe. "Ethan's too attentive," I confessed, stirring my cold coffee. Avery frowned, setting down a tray. "Attentive how? I mean, he's your stepdad, Lila. Is something off?" I wanted to deny it, to say I was imagining things, but Avery's words were like a splash of cold water. I told her about the small moments, the touches, the lingering looks, but didn't dare admit the full truth, that I wasn't just scared of Ethan but of myself, of how much I liked those moments. That night, Mom left for another work trip, leaving me and Ethan in the silent wooden house. I stayed in my room trying to focus on a beach photo I'd taken, but my mind wandered. A knock on the door startled me. Ethan stood there in a rolled-up shirt, hair slightly mussed. "Can't sleep," he said, stepping in without waiting for an invitation. He sat on a chair, a small distance away, but the space between us felt compressed. "Lila, have you ever felt trapped?" he asked, his voice low, like he was revealing a secret. I nodded, not daring to look at him, afraid my eyes would say too much. He moved closer, placing his hand on the table near mine. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable," he said, but his voice trembled as if fighting himself. I looked up, and in that moment, I saw the desire in his eyes, something a stepdad shouldn't have. I wanted to say something, to push him away, but my body wouldn't listen. I stood, walking to the window, staring at the pitch-black sea outside, trying to find a reason to keep distance. But when he stood behind me, close enough that I felt his warmth, all reason melted away. "We should stop, Ethan," I said, my voice small but firm. He didn't answer right away, just placed his hand on my shoulder, gentle but enough to make me tremble. "I know," he whispered, but his hand didn't move. Outside, the sea roared, as if warning us of a line about to be crossed. I turned, looking into his eyes, and knew we were both standing on a dangerous edge, one step from no return. Mom left for another trip, leaving the wooden house in Port Townsend steeped in silence, with only the distant roar of the ocean waves. I sat on the living room couch, laptop open before me, but the photos I'd taken were just an excuse. I was waiting, though I didn't dare admit it, for Ethan's footsteps. After that moment at the window the night before, when his hand rested on my shoulder, a fire had smoldered inside me, both terrifying and intoxicating. I told myself to stop, but my body seemed to have its own plans. Ethan walked in, wearing a fitted black t-shirt, hair slightly tousled from the sea breeze. He held 2 glasses of wine, his eyes glinting under the dim living room light. "Can't sleep?" he asked, offering me a glass. I took it, our fingers brushing, and a surge of heat flared in my chest as if the wine was a torch. "Not really," I replied, my voice soft, but my eyes didn't leave him. He sat beside me, not too close but close enough for me to feel his pull like the tide drawing me in. We started talking about trivial things, the photo I took at the beach, the house he was designing. But the conversation quickly drifted to deeper waters. "Have you ever wanted to run away?" he asked, swirling his wine, his eyes locked on me as if reading my every thought. I sipped the wine, the bitter liquid sliding down my throat, making me bolder. "Yes, but sometimes. I don't know what I'm running from," I said, and in that moment I knew I was talking about him, about us. He set his glass down, moving closer. The space between us shrank as if the room itself was melting. "Lila," he said, his voice low like the waves, "you make me lose control." His words were a sharp blade, dangerous and thrilling, but I didn't pull back. I looked up, meeting his eyes, and saw a storm swirling, desire, guilt, and something unnameable. "Then don't control it," I whispered, and in that instant I knew I'd crossed the line. He touched my cheek, his fingers grazing lightly as if afraid to break something fragile. But when his lips found mine, all gentleness vanished. The kiss wasn't tentative, it was fierce, demanding, as if we both wanted to erase every boundary. I kissed him back, my hands threading through his hair, pulling him closer as if I could merge into him. His breath was hot, mingling with my quick gasps, and in that moment there was no mom, no family, just us, swept into a vortex with no escape. Ethan pulled me to my feet, his hands tight on my waist, leading me through the dark hallway to his studio. The door closed behind us, the lock clicking softly like a declaration. The desk lamp's light fell on scattered blueprints, casting long shadows on the walls, like silent witnesses. He pushed me against the wooden table, papers falling to the floor, and I didn't care. His hands slid down my shoulders, pulling the thin straps of my top off my skin, exposing my trembling flesh. "We shouldn't be doing this," he said, but his voice faltered, drowned by desire. I didn't answer, just pulled him into another kiss, deeper, as if to silence every voice of conscience. Every touch of his was a forbidden whisper, both painful and mesmerizing. His hands explored my body, slow but deliberate, as if memorizing every curve. I clung to his shoulders, nails digging lightly into his skin, feeling the taut muscles beneath his shirt. The ocean's roar outside matched my heartbeat, each pulse a reminder that we were on a path with no return. But I didn't stop, and neither did he. We drowned in that moment, like two lost souls finding each other in the dark. When it was over, I lay on the table, breath still ragged, the lamp's light hitting the ceiling like an accusation. Ethan sat beside me, running a hand through his hair, his eyes darkened by a feeling I couldn't read. "Lila, what have we done?" he asked, his voice hoarse as if trying to pull us back to reality. I didn't answer, just stared out the window at the pitch-black sea roaring outside. Guilt surged like waves crashing on the shore, but it came too late. I knew we'd broken something irreparable. I stood, pulling my clothes back on, trying to regain composure. "Don't tell Mom," I said, my voice small but firm. Ethan nodded, but his eyes were conflicted, as if he too was wrestling with himself. When I returned to my room and closed the door, I felt a void in my chest. I sat on the bed, clutching the photography book he'd given me, wondering how I could keep living in this house with this secret. Outside, the sea roared as if mocking my weakness. The days after that night in the studio, I lived like a ghost. The wooden house in Port Townsend became a maze, each corner a reminder of the moment Ethan and I crossed the line. I avoided Mom's eyes when she was home, afraid a single glance would expose the secret. But when Mom left for work as usual, the house became a dangerous space for just me and Ethan, where reason was suffocated by uncontrollable urges. One evening, as pale moonlight filtered through the window, I heard a knock on my door. Ethan stood there, his eyes holding a silent storm. "I need to talk," he said, his voice rough, but he didn't wait for a reply. He stepped in, closing the door, and in that moment, I knew we weren't here to talk. I stood, my thin nightgown clinging to my body, and when he came closer, I didn't back away. He pulled me into his arms, his lips brushing my forehead, then my temple, as if mapping a forbidden path on my skin. "We have to stop," he said, but his arms tightened around my waist, contradicting his words. I responded, not with words, but by pressing closer, feeling his ragged breath meld with mine. We fell onto the bed, the darkness hiding actions the light wouldn't forgive. Every move of his hands gliding over my hips, his breath on my neck, was an invitation I couldn't refuse. I knew Mom could come back any moment, but that danger only made me want him more, as if the fear of being caught was a catalyst. We didn't talk much, just wordless whispers, touches that seemed to carve us into each other before everything collapsed. Our secret meetings continued, often in Ethan's studio, where the smell of wood and the desk lamp's light created a separate world. Once, when I came under the pretense of seeing a new blueprint, he pulled me into a shadowed corner, where stacked wood blocked the light. "You know I can't resist you," he whispered, lifting my chin, forcing me to meet his eyes. I wanted to protest, to remind him of Mom, but when his lips touched mine, all words vanished. We stood there, pressed together, like two fugitives escaping reality, existing only in that moment. But guilt didn't let me go. Each night, alone, I opened my journal, scribbling jagged words, as if putting pen to paper could soothe the storm inside. "What am I doing?" I wrote, but there was no answer. I looked at the photos I'd taken, the Port Townsend sea, waves crashing on rocks, and wondered if I'd break like that too. I wanted to stop, but every time Ethan appeared with that look in his eyes, I was weak again. One day at the coffee shop with Avery, she looked at me sharply. "Lila, you've been weird lately. Is something up with Ethan?" I denied it, but my voice shook and I knew she didn't believe me. "You need to be careful," she said, her tone serious. "People are starting to talk." My blood ran cold. Port Townsend was a small town, where rumors spread like wildfire. Ethan's co-worker Mark had started asking questions, noticing Ethan's distraction, how he looked at me too long when I visited the studio. "He's odd with you," Mark had said to me once, and I'd forced a laugh, pretending not to understand. That night in the studio I confronted Ethan. "Mark suspects something," I said, keeping my distance, trying to hold my ground. He frowned, running a hand through his hair. "I'll handle it," he replied, but his voice lacked certainty. Then, as if to banish the worry, he pulled me close, kissing me, fierce and desperate. I kissed him back, but inside was an undercurrent of fear, of being found out, of hurting Mom. Each time we touched, I felt like I was digging a deeper hole, but I didn't know how to stop. When Mom came back, Ethan and I acted like nothing was wrong. We sat at dinner, laughing about trivial things, but every time his hand brushed mine passing a plate, a spark shot through me. Mom didn't notice, but her eyes sometimes lingered on me as if sensing something off. I wanted to scream, to confess, but this secret had become part of me, like a scar I couldn't erase. Ethan was the same. I saw the conflict in his eyes, but he didn't stop, and neither did I. Outside, the sea kept roaring, like a warning we chose to ignore. I knew deep down that this secret couldn't stay buried forever. But every time Ethan touched me, I forgot everything, wanting only to drown in that moment, even knowing the cost would be everything. Each day, the secret between me and Ethan became a chain, tightening around my neck but also binding us together. The wooden house in Port Townsend, once a place of comfort, now felt like a prison, where every sound, the creak of a door, the crash of waves, was a warning. I tried to act normal, eating dinner with Mom, talking to Ethan about mundane things, but every time his eyes grazed me, I felt a crack in my heart, like glass about to shatter. That day, Mom called from Seattle, saying she'd stay an extra night for a last-minute interview. I listened to her voice on the phone, cheerful and unaware, and felt like a knife was twisting in my chest. When I hung up, I looked at Ethan sitting on the couch, reading a blueprint. He glanced up, his eyes sharp as a blade, and I knew we were thinking the same thing. Another night, no one to stop us. "Lila," he said, his voice low, "want to watch a movie?" The invitation sounded harmless, but I knew what he meant. I nodded, though inside I knew we weren't just watching a movie. We sat in the living room, the TV's flickering light casting shadows on Ethan's face. The movie, a story of an artistic romance, was just an excuse. I sat close to him, our shoulders touching, and when he placed his hand on my thigh, I didn't push it away. His fingers traced small circles on my skin, each one a silent invitation. I leaned in, resting my head on his shoulder, and he bent down, his lips brushing my hair. "You're driving me crazy," he whispered, his voice strained. I closed my eyes, letting myself sink into the feeling, knowing where it would lead. The front door flew open. The sound of keys hitting the floor rang like a gunshot. Mom stood there, her bag slipping from her hand, her eyes wide as if her world had just collapsed. I jumped up, my heart stopping, feeling exposed under the light. Ethan froze, his hand pulling away from me, but it was too late. Mom said nothing, just looked at me, then at Ethan, her eyes full of pain and betrayal. "Claire," Ethan started, but his voice broke, incoherent. Mom turned, walking out, the door slamming behind her. I stood there, feet nailed to the floor, breath caught in my throat. Ethan buried his face in his hands, his shoulders trembling slightly as if trying to hold himself together. "Lila, go to your room," he said, his voice dry, not looking at me. I wanted to scream, to explain, but no words could justify this. I stumbled to my room, closed the door, and sank onto the bed. Outside, the sea roared, now mocking me, mocking my foolishness. Mom didn't come back that night. The next morning, I found a letter on the kitchen table, her handwriting sharp but trembling. "I need time," she wrote. "Don't look for me." No accusations, no questions, but that silence hurt more than any words. I held the letter, my fingers gripping until they turned white, feeling a void open in my chest. I destroyed my family not with one act, but with a series of wrong choices. Ethan didn't appear all day. I heard him in the studio, the scratch of his pencil on paper, but I didn't dare go near. When I went out to Avery's coffee shop, I felt the curious stares of those around me. Mark, Ethan's coworker, sat in a corner looking at me with suspicion. "Heard your mom left suddenly," he said, his tone heavy with implication. I mumbled a reply, but it felt like all of Port Townsend was whispering about me. The rumors had started like fire through dry grass. I came home, clutching my journal, but this time I couldn't write. The photos I'd taken, sea, rocks, sunsets, sat silent on the table, like fragments of a Lila I no longer recognized. I wanted to call Mom to beg forgiveness, but I knew she wouldn't listen. Ethan said nothing more, working silently as if trying to erase me from his life. But I knew deep down we'd both be haunted by what happened. The days after Mom left, the wooden house in Port Townsend became a cold void, as if its soul had been drained. Her letter, with its trembling words, sat on the kitchen table, and I didn't dare touch it again. Each time I passed, I felt her invisible eyes, full of pain and disappointment, like a blade in my chest. I was no longer the Lila of ocean photos or artistic dreams. I was the one who destroyed my family, and there was no way to fix it. Ethan avoided me. The sound of his pencil scratching in the studio stopped, replaced by heavy silence. I saw him once, standing on the porch, staring at the sea, his shoulders slumped as if carrying the world. I wanted to approach to ask if he felt the same regret, but his eyes, distant and empty, stopped me. We didn't talk, didn't mention the moments that pulled us into the abyss. He left early in the morning, returned late as if trying to erase me from his life. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. I packed a few clothes, my camera and my journal and moved in with Avery. Her small apartment, with the smell of coffee and soft indie music, was the only place I could breathe. But even there I couldn't escape Port Townsend's eyes. People at the coffee shop, the grocery store, looked at me with curiosity mixed with disdain. Heard her mom left because of that, I overheard someone whisper as I passed. Mark, Ethan's coworker, stopped pretending to be friendly. He looked at me like a stain. Rumors spread fast like waves hitting the shore and I felt myself drowning. I tried calling Mom but the phone just rang before going to voicemail. "Claire Harper can't answer right now," the cold automated voice said, a reminder that I'd lost her. I wrote letters, dozens of them, but never sent them. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know it would go this far," I wrote, tears smudging the ink. But I knew even if I sent them she wouldn't read them. She'd built a wall and I had no right to blame her. Each night, I sat alone in Avery's living room, my camera idle on the table. I opened old photos, Port Townsend sea, crashing waves, fiery sunsets, and they only reminded me of what I'd lost. I tried taking new photos but my lens no longer captured beauty, everything was a dull gray. Avery noticed the change in me. "You need to talk, Lila," she said one night as I curled up on her couch. "You can't keep this inside." But I couldn't speak. How could I admit I'd betrayed Mom, let Ethan pull me down a path with no return? One day I got a text from Ethan. "I've been seeing a therapist," he wrote. "I don't expect you to forgive me. Just want you to know I'm trying to make things right." I read it over and over, my fingers tracing the screen, but I didn't reply. I didn't know what I felt, anger, relief, or just a void. Ethan was trying to find a way out, but I wasn't. I was trapped, not in the wooden house but in my own mind. I left Port Townsend on a foggy morning, carrying my camera and a backpack full of my broken pieces. The wooden house, once a home, was now a painful memory like a torn photo. Avery saw me off at the bus station, hugging me tightly. "You'll be okay, Lila," she said, her eyes bright with a faith I didn't have. I nodded, but inside I saw only a long tunnel with no light at the end. I went to Seattle, enrolling in a photography course at a small art center. The classes were where I tried to rebuild myself step by step. I learned to adjust light, to capture moments, but deep down I was trying to capture myself, the girl who once dreamed by the Port Townsend shore. My camera became my only friend, non-judgmental, not whispering like the townsfolk. I photographed Seattle's streets, buildings blurred in the rain, each shot a silent confession. Mom still didn't answer the phone. I wrote her a letter, not to apologize, I'd written hundreds of those never sent, but to tell her about the course, the photos I took. "I'm trying, Mom," I wrote, my pen trembling on the paper. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I still love you." The letter sat in my mailbox, unsent, like a promise I wasn't brave enough to keep. I didn't know where Mom was, whether she'd ever read those words. But writing them, even just for myself, helped me breathe a little easier. Ethan didn't contact me again. His last text, about the therapist, was the final note of our story. I wasn't angry, but I couldn't forgive him either. He was part of the mistake, but so was I. I chose to cross the line, and the cost was the family I once had. One afternoon, I stood on a Seattle beach, waves lapping at my feet. I raised my camera, capturing a wave dissolving into the shore, light glinting on the water. The photo wasn't perfect, but it was mine, a first step toward reclaiming what I'd lost. I was no longer the Lila who got lost, but I hadn't found the new Lila yet. Maybe I'd never be the same, but I was learning to live with this scar. Looking back, I understand that love, no matter how intense, can't justify breaking boundaries. Family is a sacred place, where closeness must be guarded by reason, not blind emotion. I let desire lead me, and the price was pain that will never fade. If you're hearing this story, remember, hold on to boundaries no matter how fragile they seem. One moment of weakness can destroy everything you cherish. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please leave a like, share your thoughts, and subscribe to not miss other stories. I'm Lila, and this is my journey, painful but true.